All right. This is Maurice Guibard, and I am in the home of Daryl and Lori Minnabarriet, and I'll be interviewing Daryl Minnabarriet today. This is in Spence's Bridge. Good day.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. And thank you very much for your hospitality.
You're welcome.
We've met before, but pretend that this is our first meeting, and tell me who you are.
I am a First Nations person. I was born 1947 in the next town north of here, which is in Ashcroft. And my parents, Louis Joseph Minnabarriet, he was a World War II veteran. He was a survivor of 10 years of residential school, and he was in the residential school in Lytton, BC, at a place called St. George's, which was an Anglican run church school, and he never talked much about his experiences at the residential school there, so I'm sure that they were not good. But he did talk a lot about his experiences in World War II. So he had a lot, of issues in his life. He was an alcoholic, and back in those days there was no PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, people to help him. People were just on their own. And some of them didn't fare as good as others. I had, two other uncles that were in World War II, and they all served overseas, all got discharged, and one of them became a very successful person. He was a roadmaster for the Canadian Pacific Railroad.
What was his name?
His name was Peter Dominic Minnabarriet, and tragically, one of the brothers was in a terrible car accident right after World War II and perished. So, anyways, my mother, she was a Cree from northern Saskatchewan.
What was her name?
Her name was Florine Marie Lafleur, and she came from a place called Spirit Lake, which was up by Prince Albert. Yeah, I think it's Prince Albert, right? Up there in the north. I think it's Prince Albert. Anyways, that was the home territory of Louis Riel. And so I'm a fourth cousin by marriage to Louis Riel. And I would like to say at this juncture, that Louis Riel was railroaded by the Canadian government. He was made a scapegoat. He was one of the very first voices for our people, to get our identity back and self-government and a voice in the government. Of course, he was railroaded and hanged by the Canadian government. So he paid for his beliefs with his life. And I am very proud that I am related to him and to all the other First Nations people that inhabited this territory long before any white colonial people came and took and occupied the land without our permission. This British Columbia today is unceded territory, and we would like to see some action and change on that issue, because we were wrongfully displaced, and my ancestors, when the white people first came into British Columbia, one of the first things they did was intermarry in with the native population. And so I have European blood in me. I have got two sides of French blood. One is Basque, and the other is, from my dad's side, is Basque French. And my other side, from my mom, because she was Métis, so they were Cree and French people, the Métis people. So I have two sides of French, two sides of Aboriginal blood, one being Cree, the other being our traditional territory here, which we call Nlakatlan territory. And so, I'm proud of my roots. Even my French people, And my great-grandfather was, he was one of the prospectors that came up from the United States. I have no idea how he got over to America from France, Basque France. I can only speculate that he probably didn't have the money for the fare to go around Cape Horn in South America. That, cost quite a bit of money. And I'm theorizing that he made his way on the Oregon Trail, because that's where he landed up in Oregon. And just at that time that he got there, the caribou gold rush broke out. And of course, British Columbia got invaded by gold miners. And so that's where my great-grandfather, his name was Louis Joseph Globe Antoine Minnabarriet. And I'm saying Minnabarriet because that's the French pronunciation of our Minnabarriet. We've anglicized it to sound more acceptable to our Anglican neighbors. So anyways, yeah, my great-grandfather, he put together whatever he had, and he had just a wagon, horse-drawn wagon or mule, and I think he had a few head of cattle, and they came up the Fraser River Canyon, and his wagon broke down just north of Spence's Bridge here, and so he looked around and thought, this is pretty good looking country here, because it had water, it had open range where you could settle and have cattle and make a farm and ranch. So that's what he did. He said, forget it, I'm not going up to Bakersfield or whatever it is up there. He said, so he settled, and he what they call preempt, which is another fancy term for stealing native land. he preempted like 160 acres and called it Basque Ranch, which that ranch is still in operation to this day.
Where is it in comparison to where we are now?
It is like 20 miles north of Spence's Bridge on Highway 1.
And does Basque Ranch still exist?
It does. It does. And it doesn't exist in its former state, but they are still ranching on it, and alfalfa fields and stuff like that. And it's now owned by our band, which is I belong to the band here in Spence's Bridge called Cook's Ferry.
Cook's Ferry.
Yeah.
But your family, if I understand, was part of the Pukaist?
Yes.
And?
Yes. And that came from my grandmother's. My great-grandmother, Mary Lestat, but they just called her, people back in those days traditionally they had one name. And my great-grandmother's name was Lestat. But then when the white people came in, they started you know, giving all the native people Christian names. They didn't like to pronounce our Aboriginal name or Inukat names. So she became Mary Lestaire. That's what's on her headstone today. Is Mary Lestaire, and she was born 1847, I believe, somewhere in that area, and died 1933. So she lived a long life. And, she's buried in our family cemetery. We have a large family cemetery located 9 miles north of Spence's Bridge, and it was called 89 Mile Ranch, and it's still in our family possession today. It was originally land that was owned by the BX Express Company, which was a company that was formed to transport goods up and down the Gold Rush Highway. You know, it's called the Caribou Highway. It wasn't called Highway 1.
That was Barnard's Express, wasn't it? BX?
Yes,
Right.
yes. And so after Gold Rush dissipated, there was no need for, you know, a stopping station there, right? Because there was just no traffic anymore. And so they sold that property to my great-grandfather, which was Peter Adapt. And he was another Basque Frenchman. And like, you know, a lot of these people from the Basque, you know, they were hardy souls, you know. They went all over the western United States and western Canada during those years, you know, seeking fortune and trying to find a place in life, you know. So back in, I guess, Europe, you know, there was not that much opportunity, right? And they were held down. So anyways, he bought that 89-mile ranch, and it was 89 miles from Yale, BC, which is south of here. So they had to have a starting point for the Caribou Trail. So they started there, and our property is 89 miles from Yale, British Columbia. And we still call it 89 today, you know.
So was your father also involved in ranching?
My father helped his father.
Right.
You know, and just like all Native families, they helped their parents, you know, do whatever was necessary to survive. You know, there was no such thing as going to Costco or Walmart. You went out and made a living off the land, right? So, yeah, he helped, and he did as best as he could, you know, under the circumstances of life. Things weren't as easy yet. You know, life was a little harder back in those days, you know. You had to have some guts, right, to be able to hang in there. But, you know, they didn't even think about it in those days, you know, like that. You know, they just did whatever was necessary, right?
So
go ahead.
So what about you? Like, what kept you busy as you were growing up?
Well, I guess you could say I did a lot of fishing when I was a young lad. I'd get up early in the morning and go out and spend all day fishing. I was growing up part of the time at 89 Ranch, and I helped my grandmother out in the garden and in the hay fields, and helped her tan deer hides and process stuff and chop wood and pack water. Those were the kind of chores that a young guy did in those days. You know, you helped your grandmother out. She was getting old, and then during the school days, I would get bused down to Lytton, or which is a little town south of here, and that's basically my life as a young child.
And where did you go from there?
Well, from there, it naturally being the 1960s, I became kind of a wild child. And I got kind of wild, started doing a lot of hallucinogenics, all those kind of things, exploring the world of psychedelics. And that led me to going down to a Rolling Stones concert, 1969, to San Francisco. And I didn't plan on leaving Canada for a long time. And in 1969, I was 22 years old. So I ended up in Los Angeles, and I joined a Christian organization. And if it hadn't been for that, I think I would have probably had a rough ending. So anyways, I ended up getting married there, having children. I went into a trade. I decided I wanted to do electrical work. So I went into a 4-year apprentice, got my license, and started practicing my trade. And along with doing Christian missionary work, I spent many years doing that, and learned how to reach out to people and try and make a difference in someone's life, rescue them, because we did a lot of street missionary work, right? And so we reached out to people that were laying in the gutter, not the already ones that were in church, right? They don't need help. They wouldn't accept our help anyways. So that's kind of it in a nutshell,
But you made it back to Spence's Bridge.
Yes, I did. I traveled all over the United States doing missionary work, even into Mexico, and let's see. After a while, my children are all on their own. Thought, it's time to go home, right? I got married once, had 3 children. That marriage didn't work out, so I ended up getting married again to my current wife, Lori Minnabarriet, and she was from Kansas, Oklahoma area. And so, we decided in 2011 that we were going to up that. I said, I need to get home. I'm getting old, and I need to reestablish my roots and get back to my country. It's like, I think a lot of people go through that. They want to get back to their roots when they get older. So that's what motivated me to finally come back to Canada after spending 35, 40 years down in the United States.
What was it like to come back?
It was, it was wonderful. I remember getting processed at Vesuvius, BC border crossing, and it felt like I was going to heaven. Not realizing Stephen Harper was standing there. I was naive.
Understood. Now,
so it was like going from the frying pan to the fire. At least I got out of the United States before Trump took over.
oh, there you go.
Yeah, so that was a good thing.
Now, were you rediscovering your native roots as well?
Yes, I sure was. I had a lot of questions, and so I started asking some of the elders, and my grandmother had already passed by that time, and there was still some elders left from that era of time, and so I started doing research and digging into our family history and our family tree, and trying to put it all together, because in my mind it was not cemented, right? So after a while I started really getting a good handle on how things went down, and how our family was and is today. So anyways, coming back to Canada, it was nice. I felt like I was finally home, and felt very good to come home.
Now, you're a descendant of a French man and a native woman.
Basque French.
Basque French, yes. Do you feel Métis at all?
Yes. Yes.
But it's
I'm not, put it this way, I'm not as close to the Métis side, because my Métis relatives are not as close to me, right? I'm back in my home territory where I was raised, right? So I'm not back in Prince Albert or Spiritwood, Saskatchewan. Now, if I was there in Spiritwood or Prince Albert, I would have a stronger connection to my Métis side, because I've got a lot of family over there in that area. But we're all scattered, and we don't have a strong connection on our Métis side. But I still feel it, I feel that strong connection to our Métis and Cree people, right? But not as strong as, of course, being brought up and raised here, right? So.
When you were a child, do you recall French ever being spoken at home?
No.
Among even your uncles, grandparents?
No, we didn't. We're in British Columbia.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no French ever. What about your mother, your grandmother? She was from. What language did you speak when you were a child, or did you understand any other languages?
Yeah, English and our Inuit language here. That my grandmother didn't speak hardly any English. She always conversed to me in our native tongue and the Captain. And so, being a young person, I didn't realize the value of our native tongue at the time. I never really took a strong interest in it, just enough to get through different ideas to my grandmother, right? And here my dad was very fluent in our language, and knew a lot of customs and traditions and stuff, because he was raised by my grandmother. But when you go to residential school, all that stuff is drummed out of you. You're brainwashed into believing that your native tongue is wrong, and your native customs are from Satan. That's what my mother believed. That native people were satanic. Yeah.
Is the language coming back?
Huh?
Is the language coming back among youth?
Today?
Yeah?
Yes.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, so we have a strong teachers. We've got native universities, that with strong teachers in there that are teaching the young people, and so I don't speak it myself, but I should,
Could you understand it today if it was spoken to you?
Some of it, yes.
Yeah.
Some of it, yeah.
I think we're going to pause for just a moment. Oh, something happened. So,
going to sneak some rice out here.
Oh, really? Okay.
My husband is starving. He's
No
like,
problem.
"Feed
Sorry
me."
about that.
All right.
Now, what does this say? It says, oh, I see. That's fine. Okay.
Do you want to sit down?
No, not at all. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Bill. So other than talking about these artifacts, is there an aspect of your life or your story that you think we haven't touched upon?
No, you'll have to ask me some questions.
Okay.
Jar my
All right, good
jar
enough.
my mind.
All right,
Can you?
record. Okay, we are recording. So you have a few things that are part of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering if you could tell me about them.
Well, let's start off with Dad. This is my father's violin, and my father was a very accomplished musician, and he was a self-taught. He could read music. He was a band leader, and we had a family orchestra called the Bar X Rangers, and they would travel around to different events and provide the music and entertainment. And he could play several instruments. And I remember as a child, young child growing up, Dad would have all these different instruments, but he really favored this violin. That was his favorite instrument. And so the band was called the Bar X Rangers. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the Bar X is the brand of our 89-mile ranch, the Bar X. And so he took the brand, the family brand that we put on the cattle and horses, and called it the Bar X Rangers. And so they were a very, popular band back in those days. They liked to play swing and, big band music that was popular in that day, And so when I went to the United States back in 1969, I went there with the intention of not even staying very long, and ended up coming home 35, 40 years later, and I missed all my, a lot of my, family births and deaths instead, and I missed my dad's passing. And so, I often wondered through the years, whatever happened to my dad's instruments, right? So when I came back in 2011, one of my close friends, finally, after several visits, got convicted enough to say, "I've got your dad's violin." I didn't question how they got it because I didn't want to embarrass them, right? But I had my suspicions. But at any rate, they delivered this violin to me, and I prize this as my only possession that I have of my father. And it was his prized possession. So upon receiving it, we go into ceremony. If something comes back into your family that's a prized possession, we take and do prayer, and we smudge the item, with sage. And this eagle feather is used in the ceremony, and we light sage, and we bless the instrument. We ask God to purify and cleanse it. We thank Him for bringing it back and into our life, and we thank the Creator for the life of the person that owned this, And so we go into thanks, and we give ceremony, and we give thanks to the Creator for this, for that person's life, for the things that they've done. So anyways, this is what this violin and this feather means.
Would you mind the holding the violin for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
You had told me your father was self-taught.
Yes, he was a self-taught musician. Yes, and so, like I said, he was the band leader of our family band called the Bar X Rangers.
And he played several
And
instruments.
he played several instruments. So he was a highly intelligent person, and I could see, where he had a deep interest in history. So I think somehow that that brushed off on me, because I really like history, world history, Canadian history, U.S. history, and I especially like our history of our peoples. And so, anyways, this is Dad's violin.
And his spirit is with you
And his
here.
spirit, he loved this instrument, right? And so, I'm just glad, thankful to God that he brought this back. And so, I hope that it brings some joy to our family.
Any
down the
musicians in the family now?
road. Yes. So, thank God. Anyways, these are items from my grandmother,
Yes,
and my grandmother was. Are we still recording? Good.
we are. If I could, maybe you could hold them as you speak about
Yeah,
them.
sure. This is a birch basket. This is a small picking basket that they would use to harvest, berries. And then you took this and dumped it into a bigger basket, right? So we had these are cedar coil baskets that they made, and this is a lost art. Not very many people know how to make a cedar basket, and this is just used like a scoop. Same thing with this, they went out and filled it up, and we had these great big baskets that were cedar coil baskets like this, only huge, right? So
Now these were made by your grandmother?
these were made by my grandmother. Yes.
And were they used by your grandmother?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
They're beautiful.
yeah. And these here are Lahal bones, and they're a gambling game that a lot of Native people did. It was a guessing game, right? So they would gather in a circle and beat, beat a drum and sing, and there'd be, well, it's. I'm just going to say that it's just a guessing game, right?
Sure.
These two have a red stripe on them, and these here are plain. So they had two sides. Two sides were gambling against each other, right? So they would take these Lahal bones. These are made out of deer antler, and they would put them in their hands like this, right? And they would be singing them, and put them behind their backs like this, and hide them in like this, and the other, they would go like this, and rub them in their hands, and they'd be singing, and trying to confuse the other side as to what, and they had to guess what side the striped one was on. And finally, after several minutes of singing and dancing, go like this. The other side had to guess. If they got it wrong, they had to they had these sticks in the ground and had to throw a stick over. It took a while to get through a game because they had like 6 or 7 sticks. Each side had 6 or 7 sticks. And so there was a jackpot before you had to buy in. It's like a poker game. you had to buy into the game, right? Like $5 back in those days. $5 was a lot of money, right? So the jackpot would be up to like maybe like any person that wanted to buy in had to put in, right? So there could be up to like $50, you know, in the pot. And $50 is a lot of money back then. So, anyways, they would get through their. Finally, the side that had no more sticks. All the sticks were on one side. They were the winners, and
Of
they
course.
took the pot, split it, right?
So are those pieces family pieces as well?
No, these are not.
They're culture. They're your
but
community
they're,
pieces.
yeah, they're yeah.
Culture.
So, but I use my granny's basket
For sure.
as a receptatory for this because it's part of our tradition.
Of course.
No, these weren't made by a grandmother.
Okay.
I'm just telling you some.
No, that's a good story.
some
Yeah.
history.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Now,
so
tell me about the moccasins. They're
Okay,
lovely.
I used to help my grandmother make and tan hides. And so after a deer was harvested, you had a hide with hair on it. So there's a long process in getting to this point here. And so she would soak these raw deer hides in a solution of water and some these chemicals from this lake that's right up above our ranch. It's a dry bed, and it's got alkali, and it's really thick and white. And we would go up there and go get as much as we could haul. And she would mix it up real good, like a slurry. Drop the hides in, weight the hides down with rocks, and then wait about a week. And that chemical from the alkali would get the hair loose from the hide. So then she would take the hides out of the tubs and put them on a stretcher. The stretcher was a square piece of poles, like 6 by 6 foot or 8 by. She had 2 or 3 different stretchers, the stretcher poles, right? And then she would put holes along the side of the hide and stretch it out on the stretcher. And then she would start taking the hair off. And she had this pole that it's about this long, had a round metal base on it like that, hooked it into the pole, and she would start working that pole on the hide like this. And the hair was ready to come off, so it came off real easy, right? So, and of course I had to help her. We were knee deep in deer fur. So that was a lot of work, and she would only do it when the sun was out. And so that was a part of the deer hide that I didn't like doing, was messing with the fur, dealing with all that, because the flesh came off and it stunk and it was nasty. And so get all the fur off and start working the hide. And then she'd take the brains and cook it on the stove with some Crisco and get a kind of like a Vaseline. And the deer brains act as a leather conditioner. And she'd put her hand in there, smear it on the deer hide like this, and start working it with the scraper.
On the side that the hair was?
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
She had to work both sides.
Ah, okay.
So one day was one side of the hide, flip the thing around the other way, and had to be sunlight, right? You can't cure hides in the wintertime. All summer work. So the sun and working on that leather conditioner into the hides was what processed the hides and made them flexible. Because before this, that hide is like concrete, right? So it took a lot of work to get it to this point. Finally, it would be pure, like a pure white, right? After this, a lot of work. Then she would take it off the stretcher, put it in a small little teepee, and in the ground, she put in pine cones and old rotted wood that would have like a reddish color to the root, like a dead tree or a lightning hit tree that had sat there for a lot of years and the roots had dried out. Go get the pine cones, the root, put it in the bottom of the pit, small little pit, build a teepee around it, wrap the hides on it like that, put a blanket on it, light the fire, make sure it wasn't a fire, just smoke, right? And so smoke would be coming up through the hide like this, and it smelled really good. So then she'd flip the hide around, take the blanket off the hide, flip the hide around, and usually 2 or 3, 4 hours, hide be finished. It'd be soft, supple, and we have this tan color to it. It's ready for work. So then she'd take it in the house, and cut out her patterns, and the end result is this moccasin. A lot of work went into making a moccasin. She'd make gloves and moccasins. And I don't ever remember her making a jacket or anything, but I know a lot of Indian women did jackets, embroidered them fancy. This is just very basic embroidery.
Still lovely.
It is still nice.
Was this made for anyone in particular?
No,
this set? This
no.
pair?
Grandmother would. There was a general store in town, and she would place these in a consignment, and the store would sell them and get a percentage.
Here in Spence's Bridge.
Here in Spence's Bridge.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was an old general store, right? And so.
Did they sell well?
They did.
Yeah?
Yeah, they did.
Great.
And I was always kind of a little angry at grandmother, and I told her so too. I said, she was selling so cheap. And I said, look at all the work that you put into this moccasin. And she would sell a pair like this for $5,
How far back are we going now?
Yeah.
Are we talking 1960s?
Yeah, 50s.
50s, okay.
Yeah, and so.
Wow. Still not much.
Not much.
No.
And so I was always angry at her for letting her products go so low. And her answer back to me was, I just want to stay busy and do stuff. So anyways, that's the story of the moccasins. And these are items, made by my grandmother. And this is her original plaque that was on her headstone. And so, back in those days, people made headstones out of pine, crosses, right? And they would take these plaques and nail them to the cross, right? And this was just a temporary situation most of the time. Sometimes it happened to be the only thing, and like after 50, 60 years, the wood would just disintegrate and be nothing left, right? And that's the case of a lot of family Indian graveyards today. The old people didn't have money to go and get a fancy stone headstone, right? But our family scraped together, of course, we, put together, the money and got her a real nice headstone, And so after 40 years, I come home, I missed my dad's funeral, I missed my grandmother's funeral, and that would never sat well with me, And you should be there when your family has family things like this, So my advice to anybody, keep in close contact with your family. I didn't, and I regret that. But I went home in 2011 and came back, went up to the family graveyard, which is that 89 Mile Ranch up here, and as I walked into the graveyard, first of all, we first came up to the graveyard. It's up on a hill like this, and on the plateau above it is our family graveyard. So you have to go up the side of a mountain to get to the family graveyard. But you can't, unless you got a good four-wheel drive, you can't get up there. So at the time, I didn't have a good four-wheel drive, so I just parked at the bottom of the mountain there. And it was cloudy, dark clouds, and as I was going up the side of my wife didn't want to go. She didn't want to walk up the hill, but I wanted to walk. So we were walking up the hill, and the clouds parted, and a beam of sunlight came down, just like a beam, like a power beam. Came right down onto the graveyard. Nowhere else. And I got up there, and I was pretty emotional. And I saw this laying on the ground. Our tradition is when you go and put in a stone headstone, you take the wooden one and you burn it, right? And so that's what they did. But they took this off the Granny's headstone, and just, I guess, threw it on the ground. So I got up there, and this little corner was sticking up out of the ground. And I pulled it up, and I was amazed that it says, born August 1877, died September 20th, 1970, Nancy Minnabarriet. And they just took a little, like an awl or a nail, and hammered in the letters. And so maybe some people said, well, you shouldn't have picked it up, but you know what? I felt God wanted me to have it. So I picked it up, and I have it today, And so I have these, my family and friends gifted me these things from my grandmother. But this was a gift from the Creator to me. So that's a story behind a few little material possessions that I possess from my family. And, I'm very grateful to God to let me have something, as a memento. And so I value them a lot.
I thank you for sharing those very personal stories with your viewers, and I think they're amazing stories that have great value to you and to your community as well. There's one thing that we haven't touched upon, and it's somewhat difficult. Mm-hmm. It's about the fact that back, let's say 125 years ago, some of the men, the Europeans who came into this land, mm-hmm. and who married native women, did not always stay with them.
No.
Right?
No.
Could you elaborate on what happened in the case of your family?
Well, as we just mentioned, it was custom in those days for European people to come in and hook up with native women, right? Because they didn't have the access to their own white women because they're back in eastern Canada or or back in the old country. So that's how things happened. And my great-grandfather, being Basque France, and took a native woman, and they were called country wives. And weren't actually, they didn't actually marry them. It was a common law situation, you know, where men would just live with native women. And of course, they had children, right? And so that's where my grandfather came from. He was a product of that type of situation. And you know, back in those days, if they had an opportunity to marry a white woman, they would do it. And so my grandfather, he became rather wealthy, you know, had a successful ranching operation, and found gold on his own property, of all, you know, things. Became rather wealthy. And so back in those days, they ran into that kind of a situation. They would go back to their countries of origin. And so that's what my grandfather did, great-grandfather did. And we have records of him, newspaper articles showing you know, that he left. And before he left, though, he had found another Basque French lady that was a lot younger than him, and married her and had children from her.
In Spence's Ridge as well.
Yeah, up there at the Basque Ranch north of Spence's Bridge. And so I'm not quite sure how my native grandmother coexisted with a white woman. You know, that concept of a dual, kind of like a bigamy or polygamy or whatever you want to call it, thing existed. But it was kind of commonplace for white people to do that kind of thing, you know? And so it always has irritated me to think that my great-grandfather could just up and walk away and leave his native wife and child, right? So, you know, I don't like that, how a man could do that. So, but you know, it was commonplace for people to do that kind of thing, accept it. So, you know, we, as a society today, we'd have frowned upon those kind of things, right? But in those days, it was kind of an accepted practice. And of course, you know, nowadays we frown upon those kind of things. So, you know, I don't like that, you know, the fact that he did that, but I can't change anything, you know, it is what it is. And so I have to try and swallow that, you know, thing. And so, but I will say one thing in defense of my great-grandfather. He was the man of the times, you know, and he sent my grandfather off to a trade school. My grandfather became a carpenter and a blacksmith. So he didn't just leave him like high and dry without any kind of a backup plan. So he knew that my grandfather could exist in that world, you know, and have something to fall back on, a trade. And so there's a barn up at the Basque Ranch that's standing to this day, that was built by my grandfather. Yeah, it should be listed in historic places of British Columbia, but it's not. So
is that something you'd like to see happen?
I'd like to see that happen.
We'll see what we can do.
And the foundation is starting to deteriorate, and I'm getting kind of worried that it's going to fall down, but it's still there. And so, you know, look upon the workmanship of that barn. It's a large barn, very well built, you know, to withstand the test of time. And so, I knew he was a good carpenter.
It's a testament to his talent,
yeah,
exactly.
His talent, right? So,
I just have one last question
Yes.
for you. There's a rumor that's always been in the family about Count Minnabarriet, that he was a count. Did that ever enter into any family discussions or any family?
You know, I don't know. My dad never told me anything about it, but you know, it's possible. You know, of course, you know, coming from the old country where they had that kind of, you know, hierarchy. You know, I mean, it's possible. I would, you know, I just don't know. But as far as I know, I've never heard of it. So
Okay.
it possible. Maybe in time, some will stumble across some kind of record of his nobility. You know, but anyways.
I can see a crown on you now.
Yes. Well, I'll have a crown when I get to the kingdom of heaven.
Well said.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much for your time, Mr. Minnabarriet. I really appreciate your time
Yes.
and your sharing of your family history.
Well, thank you for taking an interest, and my hope and prayer is that people will look back on the times, those historic times, and be thankful that they're here today, because those people were tough people. They endured a lot, and we're here as a testament today of their endurance and their strength and their grittiness, right? They did what they did, what they had to do to survive, right? And that's what I think people should take to heart today, is to look back on your family, be thankful for them, and to take the good. There's always bad in a family. Every family has good and bad, right? I could tell you some things about my grandfather. He was a bootlegger, and you know, he liked to drink and party, and so. But you know, you look back and look at the good, and take the good and use the good for yourself, and you know, pass that on to the next generation, because when you don't have a connection to your family, you're like a lost person. And so that when you dig into your family roots and start seeing your connections to humanity, you know, you'll become a better person. You'll become complete in your own heart, because people that are, like, say, adopted, and they have no bearing or understanding, or they can't trace their family roots and stuff, they go through life with a piece of themselves missing, right? So to become a complete person, you've got to have that connection in your life to your roots, and you'll be a better person, and you pass that knowledge on to your children, and they, if you do your job right, they will pass that on, and from generations to come. You know, we all got something to say, you know, and you should take the time to investigate and dig and search, and then when you do find stuff, retain it, transmit it, pass it on, right? So that's what family's history in our life is all about, right?
Mr. Minnabarriet, thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
You're welcome, sir.